have to be viewed from a historical perspective, that Americans historically have enjoyed the right to defend themselves under the Second Amendment, and any restriction on gun ownership has to be viewed from the lens of the history of the United States and the Second Amendment. And why do we have the Second Amendment? So you can defend yourself. When we, as a nation, were formed, we tried to change things. When you live under a king, you can't speak your mind. You'll wind up in jail if you offend the king. You can't assemble. You can't worship the way you would like. You worship the way the king likes. When you live in a autocratic environment, you don't own guns, the government does. You can't defend yourself. The First Amendment was trying to make America different, allowing individuals to speak their mind, to worship on their terms, that the government will not establish a religion, and also the right to bear arms. The Biden administration's executive order expanding background checks evades the American legal system to get a political outcome. Liberals will do anything and everything, the law be damned, to get their way. They tried to destroy Judge Kavanaugh personally to keep the seat open. It didn't work. This executive order by the Biden administration is going around Congress. It is an affront to the fundamental process we've created when it comes to constitutional rights. The hearing yesterday was setting the stage for Democrats to come after the Bruen decision. There's two decisions by the Supreme Court that have happened in recent years, pretty close to each other. The Heller decision said the Second Amendment is an individual right, John, that you have and I have and everybody in the country has to own a weapon responsibly. The Bruen decision said if you try to regulate lawful gun ownership, you have to look at an analysis historical in nature, because the Second Amendment was designed to allow people to defend themselves in dangerous situations outside their home. There's nothing in the Second Amendment about you can own a gun in your home and nowhere else. So the New York law made it impossible to own a weapon to defend yourself outside your home, and the Supreme Court struck it down, and here's what liberals want to do. They want to change that law. And if they get control of the Supreme Court, these cases will change. This is a concerted effort to attack the fundamentals of the Second Amendment as part of an effort to maintain control of the Senate, take back the House, and win the White House. To conservatives, this is a wake-up call. We need you. Understand what's going on here. So what is the Republican response on the Judiciary Committee? We're going to take the holdings of Heller. You can own a gun individually. That's a right given to you by the Second Amendment. And the holdings of Bruen, that you have the right to protect yourself by owning a gun responsibly, even outside your home, and make it part of federal statutory law. We have legislation supported by every Republican on the Judiciary Committee that will codify Heller and Bruen and make it part of the federal statutory law, giving you more protection when it comes to responsible gun ownership. We're going to introduce this bill today, and I'm urging Leader McConnell and all other Republicans at every opportunity advance this cause. Take on the Democrats now, because if you don't do it now, you'll regret it later. And there is no better spokesperson for the rights of Americans than Senator John Kennedy.
Thank you, Lindsey. You know, our founders really were geniuses. They came up with a system of individual states with rights and with state constitutions. But they also came up with a concept of an overarching federal government and a United States Constitution that would reign supreme. That doesn't mean that states don't have rights. What it means is that those rights exist consistent with the United States Constitution. Why do our institutions work in America? Why does the United States Congress work? Why does the executive branch, the presidency, work? Why does the U.S. Supreme Court work? Because as Americans, we have accepted them as institutions of government, and we've all agreed to abide by what they do. We may not like it, and if you don't like it, in the case of the executive and legislative branch, you can vote folks out. But we've agreed to abide by it. One of the roles of the United States Supreme Court is to interpret the Constitution, particularly the Bill of Rights. And what the Bill of Rights does, and what the Supreme Court does in interpreting it, is to set a floor, a minimum list of rights that we all have, and no one can take them away. The Congress can't take them away, the President can't take them away, and the states can't take them away. Now, the states and Congress and the President can affect policy, but it has to be consistent with those basic floor of rights. We have a Bill of Rights, and it's not an a la carte menu. Every right as interpreted by the U.S. Supreme Court matters. Some don't like the way the Supreme Court, through the years, through the centuries, has interpreted our rights. But we have always accepted them. Not without dissent, but we've accepted them until recently. And now there seems to be this undercurrent, I see it in judiciary, that if my Democratic colleagues don't agree with the right as interpreted by the U.S. Supreme Court, it's okay for them to ignore it. And in this case, their copy of the Bill of Rights goes from Amendment 1 to Amendment 3. They skipped the Second Amendment. But you can't do that, not and have our institutions, including the institution of the Supreme Court, survive. The Supreme Court has spoken very clearly in Heller and Bruin on the Second Amendment. We have an individual right to own a gun. Doesn't mean that Congress and the presidency and the states can't impose reasonable regulations, but they can't take away that right. Now, some Americans think the Supreme Court got it right. I do. Senator Graham does. Others don't. But we've all got to abide by it. But there's this new attitude in Washington. I've seen it develop since I've been here, that if we don't agree with the Supreme Court interpretation, we can just ignore it or change it. No, you can't. There's this undercurrent, I've seen it develop since I've been here, that cops are a bigger problem than criminals. There's this undercurrent that's developed that says if a cop shoots a criminal, it's always the cop's fault, every time. But if a criminal shoots a cop, it's always the gun's fault, every single time. And what's underpinning this undercurrent? Some of my colleagues believe that only the federal government is entitled to own guns through their police forces. And this is America. You can believe that. But that's not what the Supreme Court has said. And all Lindsay's bill does, our bill, is say, look, we really shouldn't have to do it.
Right.
It's just say the Bill of Rights matters. The role of the Supreme Court is to interpret the Bill of Rights, and the Supreme Court has interpreted it, and we're all going to abide by it. You know, I've been studying constitutional law. I taught it a little bit at LSU Law School since I was in law school. There have been plenty of opinions by the Supreme Court I've disagreed with, and I know Senator Graham, who's a scholar of the law, feels the same way. But you accept them. That's why our institutions work. And once you start doing what I sense my Democratic friends are going to try to do, is as bad as it is with respect to Americans' right to own guns, it also is going to start undermining the institution of the Supreme Court. And that's why I'm supporting this legislation, and I tried to stall for time to get Corn in here, but he's still not here.
So the bottom line is I left out one of the most important aspects of our statutory response to the hearing yesterday. We're giving individual Americans the right to sue under the law we're introducing today if governmental organizations or other organizations come after your lawful Second Amendment rights. I expect that liberal jurisdictions will be making a full-throated effort to undercut the Bruin decision, that Americans are going to find themselves having to confront their local government, maybe their state government, under this bill that John and I and all Republicans are introducing. Not only do we codify the Bruin-Heller decision, we give you the right under this statute to sue those who are coming after your right to responsibly own a gun, to give you a cause of action so you can fight back.
Can I add one thing, Lance?
Sure.
You know, if you don't want to own a gun or a rifle, you don't have to. Just don't. You don't have to. I do. I own several. I also believe that love is the answer. But I do. I own a handgun just in case. And that's my right. Under the Bill of Rights and under several Supreme Court opinions. Why can't we just accept that?
And this is part of a wider trend. The Dobbs decision, the response of the Democratic Party to that decision was to expand the Supreme Court and pack it with liberals. As we lecture Israel about their legislative efforts to realign the judiciary in their system, you got to remember that the Democrats who are lecturing Israel today proposed openly to expand the number of justices on the Supreme Court in response to the Dobbs decision to dilute the conservative majority, and that would destroy the rule of law in America, because every time one party got in power, they'd change the numbers. Mm-hmm. So they want an outcome. They don't give a damn how they get it. This is a brewing assault on the Second Amendment. We're standing in the breach today. Get behind this effort today to prevent erosion of the Second Amendment tomorrow. I know where they're going. I know what they're up to. They would pack the Supreme Court if they could. They would do away with the legislative filibuster if they tried to do it. They would extinguish minority rights in this country as part of how the Senate works, and they would change the makeup of the Supreme Court because they don't like the decisions being issued by this court. This is a critical time in American history. This is time to stand up and be counted, and we're introducing legislation today to push back. Yes, sir.
Senator Kennedy, you brought up, you said Congress doesn't have the power to, or no, you said the Supreme Court, what they say goes, and it's final. So why the legislative fix?
I think it's belt and suspenders. If you can ignore a Supreme Court opinion, as some of my Democratic friends have tried to do, there's going to be litigation. Takes it a while to get to the U.S. Supreme Court. The ignorance is struck down. But this bill, if we can pass it, will take effect immediately, and I think it will send a message that I tried to articulate earlier, that this issue is bigger. As important as it is with respect to guns, it's bigger than guns. It's about respecting the institution of the United States Supreme Court. That's how I look at it.
And can I just add something?
Yeah.
I don't think anybody asked the Democrats about why they were trying to codify the Bergerfelder decision, which allowed same-sex marriage.
Good announcement.
they took the Supreme Court holding in a Burgerfelder and made it a federal law. I think they did it in a way to jeopardize religious freedom. That's why I was opposed to it. But what's different here? You asked a really good question. This statute doesn't only codify a Supreme Court ruling, it allows private causes of actions to fight back against those institutions that may come after your Second Amendment right. It empowers average citizens with the right to sue. That's what's so important about this. We give you the ability to fight back as an individual.
I'll tell you, there's another difference too, as Lindsay pointed out with respect to Obergefell. When Congress passed the statute with respect to
DOMA.
gay marriage, it affirmed a Supreme Court opinion. And I'll tell you what Congress could not have done. It could not have undermined that opinion. Obergefell really wasn't about gay marriage. It said that as an American, you have the right, within certain reasonable restrictions, to marry whoever you want. You do. You don't have to justify it to the state. If Obergefell, or rather, in light of Obergefell, if that legislation that passed Congress had been to overrule Obergefell, it would have been knocked in the next week by the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Struck it down.
Yeah.
Is there any Democratic buy-in on this legislation?
I think there will be over time, because I know there's some Democrats, like Joe Manchin. There's some Democrats who have been supportive of the Second Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
There are a bunch of Democrats who voted against banning assault weapons. Again, I own an AR-15 responsibly. It's the person who has the gun that we should focus on. You know, the Democratic response here is to pass gun regulations on law-abiding citizens rather than stop letting people out of jail who kill you. This revolving door situation needs to stop. So the bottom line, I think we need to have a vote on this bill. It codifies Bruin and Heller. It gives you a right to sue as an individual if some entity comes after those rights. It's very important to empower the American citizenry in this area. If we had a debate on the floor of the Senate, I guarantee you it'd be bipartisan support. So I'm going to push this. Everybody on Judiciary is going to push this. This effort by the Democratic Party to change the nature of the Supreme Court because they don't like a decision by packing is a bad idea. This effort by liberal Democrats to abolish the filibuster is a bad idea. And this hearing yesterday is setting up a frontal assault on the Second Amendment. That's where they're headed. The executive order by Biden is part of it. I'll turn it over to John Cornyn.
Get him, Corner.
Well, I understand that Democrats don't like the Second Amendment, but it's part of a Bill of Rights, which is in turn part of our Constitution, alongside of the freedom of conscience, freedom to worship according to the dictates of your conscience, freedom of association, freedom of speech. This is a cherished constitutional right, and unfortunately it's a necessary right given the more dangerous country we're living in thanks to some of the Democrats' woke policies, undermining police, jeopardizing the rights of law-abiding citizens to keep and bear arms, and frankly attacking the wrong topic. We've found a way to work together when it comes to things like making sure that people with criminal records, people who have been adjudicated mentally ill, are not able to buy or maintain firearms through the background check system, the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. We've made great strides and I think saved lives by things like the Fix NICS bill that we passed a couple of years ago, which uploaded millions more records into the background check system. This seems to be one area where there is broad bipartisan consensus, as you might suspect there should be, when it comes to keeping guns out of the hands of people who are criminals and people who are mentally ill. But the Democrats seem to be focused on law-abiding gun owners who are not a threat to public safety. There is no law-abiding gun owner that is a threat to public safety. Yet the Democrats want to make it about the gun and not about the person who possesses or has custody of that firearm. Law-abiding citizens know how to operate those safely. They're more and more necessary for self-defense and protection of property, given the difficulty in recruiting and maintaining adequate police forces to make it response times reasonable so that people can depend on the police. But sometimes you can't. and law-abiding citizens need to have this option available to them. And all of these traps that are been set up in terms of state-by-state determination about whose gun license will be recognized with reciprocity in another state. We have driver's licenses that are issued from our states that are recognized all over the country. And a concealed handgun license should be treated in exactly the same sort of way. I'm glad that Senator Graham is leading this effort, and I'm proud to join he and Senator Kennedy here today, as well as our other colleagues.
One last question. Yes, ma'am.
For Senator Cornyn, obviously you helped lead on the bill regarding background checks and mental health after the Uvalde shooting last year. How do you message to your constituents? I know when you went back to Texas, you faced some pushback from Texas residents about, not protecting the Second Amendment. So how do you message this here? You're saying that this is about protecting the Second Amendment, but also keeping firearms out of the hands of people who shouldn't have firearms. How do you get that message across properly? Because the debate seems to be you're either for guns or against them.
Well, that's any suggestion that I don't support the Second Amendment is just false. It's a lie. There are people in this city who seek membership and raise money based on this issue because they know how emotional it is. But nothing I've ever done as a member of the United States Senate has eroded the rights of law-abiding citizens. It's been focused strictly on keeping guns out of the hands of people who are criminals and who suffer from mental illness. I would think that would be a common sense way to reconcile the competing interests here. But I'm never going to vote for anything that will undermine the Second Amendment.
And I'd just like to add, I voted for the package too because it made sense to me, okay? If you ask the average American out there, do you believe in responsible gun ownership? They would say yes. The Supreme Court has said it's an individual right. But rights do have limitations. You have a First Amendment right, but you can't yell fire in the theater. You can't slander somebody. So what John's trying to do is focus on making sure criminals and people who are mentally unstable are denied weapons that can hurt themselves or others. What we're trying to do here today is to tell the Democrats that your effort to destroy the Second Amendment as we know it will be fought. That we're going to introduce a law codifying Supreme Court decisions and giving you, an individual American, a right to sue people who come after your lawful gun rights. That's what's important about this bill. And to my good friend, Senator Durbin, who is a friend, and we're going to be working together on regulating social media. But here's the state of play. We had a hearing yesterday about setting up the erosion of lawful gun ownership, undercutting 2 Supreme Court cases that solidified that right, rather than having a hearing about fentanyl. More people have died from fentanyl poisoning last year than the entire Vietnam War, 70,000 just from fentanyl. More people died from fentanyl poisoning than gun violence and car wrecks combined. But we had a hearing yesterday about lawful gun ownership and how to erode it. I'm urging Senator Durbin and the Democratic Party to work with all of us to go after the drug cartels in Mexico that are poisoning America, make them foreign terrorist organizations because they are terrorizing America. It's time to terrorize them rather than sit back and be terrorized. I'm urging the Democratic Party to change your policies when it comes to fentanyl poisoning, to secure a broken border. And the head of the Border Patrol yesterday, when asked under oath, said, we do not have operational control of our border. So I find it odd that the hearing yesterday was about undermining lawful gun ownership rather than dealing with terrorist activity to the south of us that's killing more Americans than the Vietnam War did over a decade plus in 1 year with no end in sight.
Can I have 15 seconds? Because that was a really good question. As I knocked over the...
He's got a really good answer.
Yeah. Here's how I look at it. You have a right to drive a car in America. It's not a constitutional right, but you do have a right. Some people abuse that right. they get drunk and they get behind the wheel of an automobile. And it's a problem. We don't solve that problem by revoking everybody's driver's license and saying nobody can drive anymore. We concentrate on the problem, the drunk driver. And what some of my Democratic colleagues are trying to do, they're trying to get rid of all automobiles and drivers in America to deal with the drunk driver. And it's backwards. And they can't do it because you have a constitutional right under the Second Amendment to own a handgun or a shotgun or a rifle to defend yourself or to hunt or for whatever reason. You don't even have to explain it to government. So, as Senator Cornyn did, let's try to concentrate on the drunk drivers, if you will. Let's don't get rid of all drivers.
Well said, and they said amen. All right.
Mike Holden, and my time. Oh, I thought that sounded like Kelly Ferris.
Hi, how are you? I know I
Good,
snuck
how are
in
you?
here at the last minute.
That was a good question.
Well, Cornyn got obliterated.
Have they spoken at all about like law enforcement worries about, capabilities regarding like just lack of, background checks don't always solve everything. You have people who act before those things can catch them.
Yeah,
Like, we don't have some
there was like,
mind
that
control.
whole debate happened last year when that bill was passing, and so, but after.
Anything on this though? This I'm only a
This is brand new, this is
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah, I know,
interesting.
but
Bill text?
they haven't-
I'm good,
Thank you.
I got it, thank you. Who are you with?
Senator Graham's office.
Oh, are you Taylor?
I'm Kathleen,
Oh,